Hey everybody, we are teaching tilt brush, and this time we're going to dive down underwater and create an entire environment that's meant to be underwater. Shipwrecks, scuba diving, coral reefs, that type of thing. So we're going to actually, instead of using our normal landscape, I'm going to actually use one of the two color settings. Rather than try to have an ocean floor, we're going to do this from scratch. So I'm actually going to grab the pistachio setting. You can see it's got two colors, a green fading into orange. So I'm going to grab our landscape controls, and instead of green to orange, I'm going to go from a pale sort of cyan greenish blue, not too bright, down to a much darker deep blue itself. There we go. In fact, I can make you a little bit darker even. So now you can see this two-tone color from lovely teal down to a true dark, dark blue. And I'm going to set that to be my main color of the environment. The dark obviously being underneath me and the pale up above. Now I'm also going to add fog. In underwater scenes, things fade out very, very quickly. I'm going to choose a dark blue, very similar to my background color. But because the background's got this fade, that dark blue fog will have things turn into silhouettes as they move into the distance. So I'm going to move this out of the way, but we'll be needing it again later. So if I was to make an object over here, and then I send it far away into the distance, you can see how it becomes a silhouette. And the amount of fog determines how quickly, work with me here, lost control of my control panel here. The amount of fog determines how quickly it's going to fade out into that background blue. Now, it's going to be different from my headset as it is to your camera. So I'm going to get this up into the foreground, add some fog, and have that slowly fade. So by the time it reaches me, it's pretty much just a silhouette. If I have this shade of blue get close to that background shade of blue, a little too bright, now you can see how it's going to start fading into the actual background itself. A little too dark that time. And the more it fades out, that's what's going to help be a little more convincing that's fading into the distance. There, that's a pretty good fog color. I still want the silhouette. There, but now it almost disappears. Okay, fog color matching the background pretty close. For now, I'm going to turn the fog off so that you can see what I'm going to do with these pieces. And to start with, we're going to erase this piece and start from scratch. So let's get centered on our size. And now I'm going to make some pieces to represent some reef, some rocks underwater to give me some distance and context. So I'm going to make the whole world a little smaller for a moment, go up to dinosaur size. I'm going to be using a neutral gray, and I'm going to grab the matte hull. So when I make a blob, now I can go back to normal size to see roughly how big it is. Okay, that's certainly bigger than I am. That's pretty good as sort of a background type of thing. And as I add the fog, here's where we can see it fades into the background. Okay, we like the fog. Another thing you'll notice is I'm going to need to work on the lighting. Now that I've got an object in place, let's bring up our lighting panel. For an underwater, we're going to have a pale light coming from above and a very dim light from below and very blue but dark ambient. So I'm going to bring my sun a nice sort of watery yellowish, not too saturated, still fairly pale. And I'm going to bring it almost directly up above. I'm even going to darken it a little bit, because the sunlight is filtered through the water. My moonlight is going to be a nice dark blue coming from almost underneath, maybe a little bit of an angle to give it some character. But I'm also going to need to make the fill light very dark and rather blue. There we go. So as we move the light around, okay, let's brighten that up a little. Don't make it too yellow. There we go, because we don't want to tint the picture too much. If I move this around, you can see how the blue, let's make it a little brighter. Okay, so there's a little bit of light cast by my underlight to tint things a little more blue. So we're going to have blue underneath, light from up above. And then we don't need you anymore. And then when we add fog, that's going to help things fade out into the distance. Okay. So now I need to think, am I doing a long coral reef? Am I doing a flat bed with a shipwreck? I'm going to do some of these rocky heads with a rocky bottom. So I'm going to use my matte hull, do a couple of different forms for these rocks. Now I'm going to select these guys and make some duplicates at slightly different angles, slightly different directions, maybe overlapping a little here and there. Don't be afraid to go into the distance, change your scale. If you want to add little details, we can go in with our hull brush and add some more details. So now I'm building up a fairly complicated sort of terrain over here. Fill in some patches, give some areas a few more unique characteristics. Now we're starting to get something here. In this particular zone, I don't have a floor. So I'm going to go up to dinosaur size, make something that's a few pieces. But now I'm going to grab this and make it giant sized. So I can actually make a big floor covering my area. There we go. So now I have this much deeper terrain. Let's get it so we have a nice background here. Actually, if that's our background, we're going to grab our terrain. I'm actually going to do a select all because I'm on PC and I can do that. But then remove the giant terrain piece. Come back here, giant terrain piece. I don't need to duplicate you. You're way far, much bigger and farther away than I thought. Okay. Now, let's move you so you make a nice background. How's that? Almost. That makes a little bit of a better background. Okay, now we're going to pull you a little closer. Make a couple more duplicates. Okay, now I've got a nice reef background going behind me. And with a larger floor plate, I even have it fading into the distance. So now when I start adding fog, you can see how the landscape very quickly fades into silhouette. But if the visitor then moves around the environment, more and more will be revealed as they move around. Okay. So now that I've got a lot of this happening for me, now we're going to start adding the details that make it feel underwater. Right now it's just this big rocky shape, and other than the color blue, there's not really much to associate it with underwater. So now we're going to add the details that add the underwater and then the fog. So let's get you off to the side a little bit. Standard obvious details are going to be bubbles, but bubbles underwater, as they travel up, they get bigger because of the pressure. So if I'm going to have a trail of bubbles, let's go over here. I'm going to find a nice dark blue, grab my bubbles, but I'm actually going to make myself fairly small and make the brush fairly small to get a few bubbles to start with. World a little smaller, brush a little bigger. Few more bubbles. World a little smaller, brush a little bigger. Few more bubbles. So now this column of bubbles is growing in size as it goes up towards the surface. So these bubbles are much bigger than those bubbles. And anybody who's spent much time scuba diving, that type of thing, will know that that's a visible effect and it helps read. Now, bubbles are also animated, so you can see how they have that slight swaying motion. This will help with the whole overall effect. Now, rather than draw that whole thing from scratch all over again, I'm just going to quickly choose my selection tool and select the bubble column. So I can put a couple of different ones in a couple of places. Feel free to change scale, change size. So as you move it around, it is going to be a noticeably different column. That'll be enough for now. So now I have a number of these air bubble columns throughout my piece of art. And depending on the scale you want to work with, maybe we'll now go through, we'll get rid of a couple of these, a little more in here than I need. So we'll trim that one down. Okay, bubbles in the background. Now, bubbles and smoke. Remember that these guys are light, not paint as normal, so they won't fade out from the fog. So you'll always see some of those things. So if I wanted to add a little more mist, a little more zone to that, I could indeed grab my smoke tool and go for a very dark shade. Same as before, I'm going to go with a small brush at the bottom that gets a little bit larger and larger as we go. So you can see it just adds a little bit more color, plus a little bit more movement to that particular smoke column, bubble column. That actually works so well, I'm going to do it to this one too. Smaller size, bigger size, bigger size. And it adds a lot of attention grabbing. Now, smoke is light, so as I add fog, you can see it doesn't really fade out from the fog. So that's why you don't want to do that too much, because then you're going to see a lot of these things off in the distance, whether you want them to or not. Underwater plants can follow the same type of loose motion. I'm actually going to use the paper tool because that actually has a bit of a surface texture as well. Now I'm going to find a nice medium shade of green, not too vibrant, not too bright. Even though it will fade off in the distance, most underwater plants aren't brilliant green, but are deeper greens. So now we're going to come down here. With these, I'm not only going to change motion a little bit, but you'll notice I rotate a little bit too. So we get a little bit more of the highlight, a little bit more shadow. We'll change size. So there are some smaller strands in and amongst the larger strands to give us that sort of kelp type of feature. That's not bad. So now we'll come over here. We'll add another little piece of kelp. And again, vary the size, vary the length, vary the directions that they flow. And it will read as these underwater plants. Depending on how much underwater botany you know, you could do different styles. Here's where we're going to try our vine. So we're going to grab our icing tool. It's a little too thick. Shrink it down a little bit for some more pieces coming off. Remember, this is three-dimensional, so don't make all your branches coming off in the same directions. As you get more branchings, you can get smaller and smaller lines. There we go. So now we're starting to build this underwater setting. Let's kick in that fog now. So as you move through the setting, more pieces appear out of the fog and move around. Colors get more brilliant as you get closer, that kind of thing. Underwater settings using these art elements. Let's crank the fog back down so we can see all these elements nice and sharp and clear. If we really want underwater, it's never that sharp and clear, so even just a little bit of the fog really gives a lot of that sense of depth. Fish and life tends to be brighter colors, so I'm going to just grab a nice orange and use my cell vinyl because it's already a pretty good shape. And I'm going to do a school of fish over here, again varying the size. Now let's switch to a pale white. Finding some fish here. Let's grab all you guys. Tone you down a little bit and get some duplicates. Different sizes, different directions. Make some tiny ones in the background, couple of schools back here. There we go. Now we're getting a lot of things happening. And again, using the fog, the fish will also fade out with the distance so that we've got this whole underwater environment that we're playing around with. Let's kick up the fog a little bit more so those very distant fish, you can see how they come out of those distance and then they fade into disappearance into the background. Got some big foreground ones, some background ones. You can be a lot more detailed. I'm just doing this as a way so we can quickly see what sort of environments we can build here. So even with these few little experimental details, we have very much that feeling, that environment being brought out. I could even do things like sunlight in the distance. If I go for my smoke tool and bring in a much more, almost a yellowish green. Now I'm going to come all the way into the background and just do some, oops, that's a little too bright. Angling down in the background type of thing. Now remember, smoke is a light source. So even with lots of fog, we've got those line strokes in the background showing through at 100%. So depending on the environment you're trying to make, we can bring in all these different elements and the environment itself to see how much control we get. Let's see, a little bit more fog. How does that look to you? There we go. A little too much. But now you can tailor it to how deep, how dark. We'll bring in shipwrecks and submarines and scuba divers. But these are the details that'll make it feel underwater. The top-down lighting, the fog effect, and have things that expand, things like smoke and bubbles, smaller towards the bottom that grow as they go towards the surface. These are the types of things that will bring these environments to life. Now we can add a big shipwreck and all the fun stuff. I'm going to leave that to you. I'm just setting up the underwater environment as part of this lesson, and hopefully this has inspired you to do some really fun and interesting stuff. If you do, feel free to let me know. That's why we have this channel on YouTube, so you can let us know in the comments if you've done some nice pieces, got some good inspiration from what we do, that kind of thing. We do this all the time here at youtube.com/shamelessmayhem. So let us know what else you'd like to learn about. If there's any environments you'd like us to do, if there's any techniques you'd like us to show off, that's what we're here for, to help you guys have fun with Tilt Brush. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.